Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful weekend and a wonderful 14th of April 2025. I don't know where it got rainy showers here today in Cincinnati, so here we are once again having to deal with the rain after a wild weekend that has had the entire weekend covered with rain and floods everywhere. Just when everything was starting to settle down, here we go again. Before I get started with my show, one thing that always needs to be brought up, everybody knows I conclude my shows with the importance of making self care a number one priority. And if you feel like you're struggling, always get help. It sheds a light after what tragic event took place over the weekend with Kyran Lacey, the standout football player of LSU. You know the story there. I won't divulge into details. I'm sure those in the sports field read the story. I always talk about the importance of self care because it's the best thing you can do with your mind. It puts you at ease. And if you take care of yourself, a lot of things can happen and fall into place. Now, we know mental illness is a massive thing. I'm not going to dig deep into it because we know the stories with all of this. But if you are struggling, please get help. And if you have to come to me for it, I'll gladly help you because I hate to hear stories about this all over the place. And it's just absolutely tragic. A young kid like Kyran Lacey, you know, took his own life. I always talk about the importance of self care because I had to go through some of this myself. But I think it's important that everyone takes care of themselves first, their mental state and their physical state, because if they do that first, a lot of things will come through. May the family of Kyran Lacey find peace and solace through a very, very difficult time. As I start here with the show today, I see a few new people out here. A bit of what I divulge into, especially a few of you I met personally earlier today. I think you know who and what I'm referring to. Like everybody else, I decided to do this, bring up a bunch of top topics in the world of sports, mainly from the NFL, the NBA, and combat sports. Sometimes I'll throw in some other stuff like I'm going to do tonight. Show streams live on the X platform, among many others. And it also carries over to the uh, new other type of platforms like Apple, Spotify, and iHeart. If you guys miss anything of this, you're more than welcome to check me out on those three platforms as this show also on the particular platforms after my show is done. Now I'm going to get right down to it here a little bit. Big news out of Tennessee over the weekend is the dismissal of Nico Iamaleava. I don't even know how to pronounce the individual's name. Turned out with the whole NIL garbage that's been going on. He misses team meetings, misses a bunch of other things. And the head coach, Josh Heupel, basically said, I'm not dealing with it. He can go. Basically, he was booted out because he wants to be not the greatest teammate in the world. We know this has to do with all the NIL and the transfer portal, yada, 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 which I'll touch on here in a minute. But kudos to Josh Heupel for not putting up with this kind of baggage because we know the college football spring games and the spring season has a different dynamic than, let's say, like the NFL does. And it requires more attention than you would think. And for him to act the way he did and now have this happen, it's a terrible loss for him. Of course, he's going to wind up in the transfer portal. They're talking about him possibly going to Oregon, of all places. Good luck, because there's a character named Dante Moore over there, and you're not good enough to overtake Dante Moore as a quarterback in Oregon. Maybe you can find another school you could probably start and try and rehabilitate yourself. But when you miss team practices like this, at that level, for an institution like Tennessee, who is, always in the middle of the SEC mix, and with big goals that Tennessee has, is a right thing that they did, and they can just move on forward from this particular episode. Good luck to Nico Iamaleava, but smart move by Josh Heupel to basically part ways and just send him out. I mean, if you're going to miss practices, so it's like, missing work, being tardy for work repeatedly, at some point, they're going to have to cut their losses. That's what Josh Heupel did to Nico Iamaleava, and he did the right thing. And Tennessee can now move on to build a strong program. Amazing how these kids with this NIL and all this garbage is taking place can think they can do whatever it is that he wants. And in this case, Josh Hoople basically said, if you want to do this, find another institution because you're not doing it here in Tennessee. Kudos. Of course, the hot topic is the transfer portal and the NIL. I said all along, the only reason why I think it's a bad thing was because they did a poor job planning this out. And because they did a poor job planning this out, you have what you had happen in Tennessee. I mean, ever since the ruling by the Supreme Court that says they can go ahead and pay players, which I'll acknowledge I don't have a problem with, but the fine line has been drawn. And when they put this together, it seemed like they did the poorest job digging the details and putting this together simply because when the ruling was ruled in their favor, they decided to just throw out there whatever it is they want to throw out and test the waters. And now we have this as a result. Should have thought this out much better. Should have had more stipulations in this to help much better, which it didn't turn out that way. That's why situations like what just happened to Tennessee happened. It's not the first time. Several times before that, and it certainly won't be the last time. This whole thing is getting started and it's becoming a mess, and it's sort of take the luster away from collegiate sports, especially college football, which is one of the premier sports in the nation, especially here in the States, for my international followers who follow American football. I mean, you always see the packed stadiums all over the place in college football. You always see the ratings go up among college, football games, and even college basketball, I should add also. That's a part of it. But this whole NIL and transfer portal thing, I get the general concept, but the details were missed and missed badly. And now we have a mess. In the next couple of years, the NCAA needs to do a better job of cleaning all this up simply because it's just a little bit out of control. And we're going to have something like this as long as we have this particular stuff. Never thought I'd live to see the day where they could be the equivalent of collegiate free agents. I mean, that's what we have here. I mean, shouldn't you be happy you're actually getting a chance to play college football somewhere? If you're going to get that picky, what does it say about you at the end of the day? Some details need to be ironed out, and this thing needs to be better situated than what we have it as at the moment. Quick shout out to the local soccer team here. It is FC Cincinnati with the 1-0 win over DC United. It was Dada Valenzuela with the goal at the 28th minute. Perfectly job with the dribbling the ball with his feet, setting up the defender, crossing him over a la you would see in the NBA. But with the soccer ball is, of course, with the feet, squaring the defender up. Perfectly placed kick in the upper corner where the goalie missed it. And it was basically the only goal of the game. And it turned out that now FC Cincinnati is now in a deadlock for first place after a bit of a crappy start. I mean, I wouldn't put them in the same team they had 2 years ago when they won the Supporters' Shield. Maybe they're deeper, but that team that won the Supporters' Shield a couple years ago was so top-heavy with Luciano Da Costa and Brandon Vasquez leading the way. And, of course, a healthier Matt Miazga and Nick Hagland on the defensive side. But this team might be a little deeper. Whether that's a Supporters' Shield, I don't know. But they got a couple nice wins over the last couple weeks to get themselves back in the fray here. I mean, guys all over the place contributing. And the goalie, Ruben Celentano, has been playing lights out at the goalie over there with a particular team. And as a result, they're in a deadlock at first place when it comes to points in the Eastern Conference. When you think about teams like the Columbus Crew and Inter Miami featuring Lionel Messi, among many others. But FC Cincinnati is back in the mix, and it's always a good thing. I look forward here soon to taking the show to TQL Stadium to do more soccer analysis. But what a win on the road. Anytime you can get 3 points on the road in soccer, especially in Major League Soccer with how the seedings are set up and the conferences are set up, it's a big deal. Kudos to FC Cincinnati. Dado Valenzuela with the goal at the 28th minute. Job well done. They've found a way to bring electricity to Cincinnati sports, something that the Reds and Bengals haven't been able to do for the last several years. And they basically kept the Cincinnati sports afloat. And kudos to the management team as well as the head coach, Pat Noonan, for yielding a competitive team that has TQL Stadium always packed, always between 25 and 30,000 people. Yours truly going to be one of them here coming soon. as well as this show. I never thought I would have to spend the day to talk about soccer much, but here I am. Now into some NBA news. Huge shout out to Chris Paul. At the age of 40, in his 20th year in the NBA, playing all 82 games in the NBA for the entire season. If I'm correct, I think he's the only player to do that over at year 20 of his career. In the era of load management, where we have cowards like Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, Joel Embiid complaining about, ticky-tack fingernail injuries, here's Chris Paul, basically a throwback old school player, playing in every game of the season for the San Antonio Spurs. Of course, the Spurs won't go on anywhere after the health issues of Wembayama. But Chris Paul, being the pros pro, played all 82 games and still a valid contributor. I believe still finished in the top 10 in assists. And wherever he goes from here, looks like he still has enough game left, because when you talk about the point guard position, especially in the NBA, you got to be more cerebral than you are when it comes to physical ability. And maybe few, if any, were as cerebral as Chris Paul, especially in his heyday when he was with the New Orleans Hornets, among many teams. But he showed in the season in San Antonio, he still has enough game left. Granted, is he the Chris Paul of 10, 15 years ago when he was among the best point guards in the NBA? Probably not. But still a valid, strong contributor. Showed it this year, but showed just how tough he is to play all 82 games at the age he is, and in the year 20 of the NBA, at a time when everybody complains about the NBA's load management system, when we have cowards like Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, and Joel Embiid complaining about pinky injuries and fingernail injuries. Chris Paul just doesn't give a darn. He played every game. He deserves nothing but love and props. Kudos to him. And the news out of Phoenix was the firing of Mike Budenholzer after 1 year in Phoenix, the 36-46 record. This is what happens when you mismanage a team and you overblow your cap and you invested in only 3 players and the net results become negative and you're paying a $683 million repeater luxury tax. Somebody is going to be out of a job, and that's what happened. I mean, you got Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, fine. I mean, if someone said you can get a Kevin Durant, you go get him. Still a top 20 player of the NBA. Devin Booker, the face of the Suns franchise, of course, he's not going anywhere. But when they made the deal for Bradley Beal from Washington, you got a feeling this was going to happen. I mean, the guy hasn't played a healthy season for quite some time. And even when he's healthy, hasn't been himself in about 5 to 6 years. He was drawing comparisons to Ray Allen when he came out of college. Never really lived up to that much. I mean, when he can light it up, obviously. But the contract that they took on and what they gave up to get him. And on top of that, you already had Durant and Booker's contracts, and you're deep in the luxury tax, and you don't make the playoffs, something is wrong, and somebody was going to pay a swift price, and it turned out it was Mike Budenholzer. Now, no one's going to mistake Mike Budenholzer to be the second coming of Phil Jackson or even a Greg Popovich, although he won a title in Milwaukee. But he was set up to fail because the Suns management just totally mismanaged everything, has to pay a swift tax, and this is the end result. Now, of course, they're talking about dealing Kevin Durant in the offseason. Who knows where he may wind up. There's going to be a lot of suitors out there. But, of course, his credibility went down the tubes in 2016 when he joined Golden State off a 73-9 season. Everybody in the NBA knows the story there. So, he's at an impasse. Obviously, they're not trading Devin Booker. That's the face of their franchise. Bradley Beal has no value, so good luck trying to trade Bradley Beal. But the Suns and the Suns management just blew this because they mismanaged a lot of things, especially when we talk about the swift repeater luxury tax they have to pay, and it's an insane number. If you're going to pay that kind of insane number, you better at least yield a championship caliber team, and the Suns really never was one this season, despite having those big 3. Now, I know Durant's been in and out of the lineup. I know Beal's been in and out of the lineup, but it doesn't excuse it. The team you had around him wasn't all that great. That's why you wound up the way you did, and that's why Mike Budenholzer is out of a job. unfortunate for him because he was the longtime right-hand man for Greg Popovich during that crazy run the Spurs had in the Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili era. And he yielded a lot of great offers. Of course, took Milwaukee to the title in 2021. And basically, Giannis Antetokounmpo wanted him out so bad to where he was doing a celebratory dance after Mike Budenholzer got fired, which says a lot about Giannis Antetokounmpo. But for the Suns, you might as well just blow it up and rebuild from scratch. Because if you're going to be fine with paying all this luxury tax and winding up, missing the playoffs with a 36-46 record year in and year out, what does it say about you? What kind of a product are you selling to your fans in Phoenix, who is probably one of the more loyal fan bases in the NBA because they ride it out with the Suns through the thick and thin? I mean, I can go all the way back to when Charles Barkley was playing for the Suns. I mean, they rode it out with him for the longest time. And, of course, the Steve Nash and Mari Stoudemire era, where they could never beat the Tim Duncan Spurs or the Kobe Bryant Lakers. They still stuck it out with them. And, of course, he went to the finals to lose to Milwaukee in 2021. They still stuck it out with them. But now, what is going to come out of this? Simply because when you mismanage this and the product is basically a net negative, you're not going to yield positive results. Might be time to start this thing all over again. I mean, you still keep Devin Booker. He's the face. Send Durant and Beal out the door. I mean, good luck trying to send Beal out the door because he has no value. So good luck for Phoenix. And basically, we'll see where this one goes. Because you got to get out of that massive tax. And I mean, the tax is through the roof. I haven't seen a number like that for quite some time. I know Golden State had one when they had Steph, Clay, Draymond, and KD, but they were winning championships. That was the difference. Speaking of mismanagement, we're coming back home to Cincinnati. And I'm going to read this a little bit here because I'm trying to understand this as I go along. It was the other day that the Bengals made a proposal for $350 million to the state of Ohio for stadium upgrades. Turns out that Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, basically said, we're not doing it because we don't have the money. Now it turns out there's a budget in the state Ohio House that includes a proposal for the $600 million that the Browns wanted for their stadium, but they threw the Bengals under the bus. And per usual, everybody here in Cincinnati has their panties all up in a bunch. It always comes back to this. One of my favorite quotes here, I'm going to read this. This is how whiny they are, talking about how the state of Ohio is using the Bengals stadium as leverage to help out the Browns so they can compete with the Colts and the Lions in terms of stadium upgrades. And talking about how the scummy Haslams get their way and the Bengals are used as a bargaining chip. First of all, nobody's being used as a bargaining chip because last year you yourself spent $1.2 billion on upgrades, and guess what? Nothing came out of it. Now you're asking for the state for $350 million. Question I asked last time, and I'll ask it again. Where is the money going? If you're going to spend $1.2 billion on something like that, why don't you just build a stadium from the ground up and just alleviate yourself from all of this mess? That's where I get confused at, and that's where I lost the fan base a long time ago. Because everyone has their panties all up in a bunch because the proposal was rejected. You're asking for a bailout because you want to appease your ownership and management and not hold them accountable for anything that's taken place. You guys were fine with all the money that was devoted to Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins for the last 3 years. And I said all along, it's going to be Super Bowls or bust. If you don't net Super Bowls, you're going to be worse than Enron. Now you guys are yapping about the state not wanting to help you out because you want stadium upgrades. If you want stadium upgrades, shut your mouth and get it done yourself. Period. Because asking for a bailout is one of the most cowardly acts any fan base can do, especially here in Cincinnati. It's one of the most cowardly acts ownership can ask for, like the Bengals. It includes Hamilton County. I'm not letting them off the hook yet. Because this thing was at an impasse when it turns out false accusations both ways. You know, one was saying the other defaulted and vice versa. And now we have a hot dogging mess in Cincinnati, and I don't know what the hell it's going to do. Why? Because They can extend it at least 2 more years, which I think is going to happen. They have till June 30th. But per usual, the Bengals fan base, the Bengals media people like, EBN, 700 WLW, 1530 Cincinnati, among many others. And of course, Fox 19, WLWT Channel 5, WCPO Channel 9, and WKRC Channel 12. Everybody affiliated with them is carrying themselves like a bunch of morons right now because they're all with their panties in a bunch, complaining about a lack of support for this particular stadium. Instead of whining about it on the television set, instead of whining about it on the internet, and instead of whining about it to me, why don't you shut up and take it to the Bengals ownership and tell them to spend the money themselves? I mean, their net value is $4.5 billion. They can spend it themselves. Why are you reluctant to give up your own, to upgrade yourselves, and you rely on the state to help you out? Where is your money going? If your value is $4.5 billion, why don't you just do your own upgrades and literally tell the state to stick it when they didn't want to help you out? Because you guys just spent $1.2 billion on upgrades not too long ago, where you should have taken that money and bought it and built a new stadium from the ground up with the upgrades, and it would have been history. But per usual, in terms of the Bengals fans, the Bengals media, and the Bengals ownership and Hamilton County, they're always 5 years behind the 8 ball to where they don't know how to think straight. They don't know how to think the big picture. They're always so short-sighted in the way they think. They're always small-brained in the way they think. And that's why there is a mess in Cincinnati when it comes to this. I don't expect them to leave anytime soon. I expect by June 30th that 2-year lease is going to be extended to 2028. But when that time comes, we're going to be having this discussion again. And now the taxpayers and all this stuff getting into a nasty hoopla. Look at what happened in Kansas City with the Chiefs, because in 2030 or 2031, I believe, they're going to wind up having to relocate with all of that that's going on. If you guys don't want that, start holding the team accountable. Start holding ownership accountable. Quit calling on Mike DeWine and the state to bail you out because you don't want to hold yourselves responsible and not be able to take care of your own butt. Don't rely on bailouts. Grow a pair. Be men. Be women. Take care of yourselves first. Do it all by yourselves. Quit worrying about having people bail you out because no one's going to bail you out for a figure of $350 million, even if they had it. Because the state has bigger fish to fry than worrying about an NFL team crying for $350 million to help with the stadium upgrades when it was something they built for themselves from the ground up. If they want to upgrade, spend the money and do it yourselves. Question is, do you even have the money to spend it? What are you going to do now? Pull out massive business loans where you can find yourself in bigger debt? Because trying to pull a $350 million loan, I don't even know what that's going to be mapped to. Maybe like $600+ million with interest. Good luck, Cincinnati. I mean, I hope something is done. Mike DeWine basically said he doesn't have the money. Bengals fans are having their panties all up in a bunch. Bengals media is acting the way they do. Specifically, Sarah Elise, who's just an idiotic moron. Kelsey Conway, Chris Rowling, just to name a few, you idiots over here. But you guys want that done? You cough up the cash yourselves and you fix it. Don't ask anybody for a bailout. Don't even ask me either, because you're not going to like what I'm about to say to your face. I swear, the biggest thing I've always hated is when you can't take care of your own self and you rely on others to bail you out. That's like the most ridiculous thing ever. That's why I always tell people to make self-care your number one priority. When I say take care of yourselves first, doesn't mean asking someone for a $350 million bailout. Crazy. And over the weekend, speaking of guys who don't need help bailing out, Jerron Boots Ennis put on a show. This is Eimantas Stanionis. And I mean, he just obliterated him from start to finish. I mean, the dude, he had the goods from the Southpaw stanza 1-2, just battered him till he quit on the stool in the end of the 6th round. Basically, the fight was a mismatch. Of course, the PBC idiots saying he won because Stanionis was on a 16-month layoff. Stanionis could have had a fight 3 months before this fight, and Jerron Ennis would still do the same thing to him because Stanionis offered nothing. Ennis was the man in the division, and he established it by being a 2-belt winner and winning the lineal welterweight title on top of it. And this ideology of a fighter being inactive and to take credit away from a victory, like the PBC fanboys are doing here with Boots Ennis is one of the most despicable acts maybe ever. You know why the guy was inactive? Because he chose to be inactive. And if he was active, it wouldn't matter because Jerron Boots Ennis is a heck of a talent. I mean, he showed it and just paintbrushed this guy. Now, granted, a couple of times he got hit unnecessarily. I get it. Defense is still an issue with him. Needs some cleaning up there. But the talent of Boots Ennis is basically surreal right now. And he's the man to beat at 147, whether everybody likes it or not. Doesn't matter if Stanionis was on a 3-month layoff, a 3-day layoff, a 3-decade layoff, or a 3-lifetime layoff. It's not going to matter because he couldn't carry Jerron Ennis's boots jockstrap. Anyone who thinks that Stanionis could carry Boots Ennis' jockstrap on a regular basis needs to shut up, get off the apps, go to a local hospital, get checked for CTE, come back to me for results so I can help you, because he never was in Boots Ennis' league, never has been, never will be. Saturday night validated it, whether you guys like it or not, because Boots Ennis right now is the king of the welterweight division. Now he has options if he wants to have them. Of course, Barrios is one, but we know Barrios lost his balls a long time ago because he's part of the PBC brand. That makes him with no balls by default. Of course, the talk with Brian Norman Jr., because he was promoted by Top Rank. It gets a little tricky there. Of course, there was an offer that was refused, but simply because, for many reasons, I won't go into details. Or he can go up to 154 and challenge a guy like a Virgil Ortiz, which I think would be a sensational fight. Or some of the other belt holders there, like Bakram Murtazayev, the one that whacked Tim Tszyu not too long ago. Or maybe in a fight with him and Tszyu should be pretty good, because Tszyu reestablished himself not too long ago. Or even a fight against Sebastian Fundora, the guy Earl Spence Jr. ducked. He has options right now. Everybody's talking about the big one with Terrence Crawford. I think it's 50-50 whether that happens or not, because Crawford's too busy trying to find a way to beat Canelo Alvarez, which I wish him the best of luck there. But if you still think Stanionis belonged in the same category as Boots Ennis, Saturday night validated it. There's a reason why Boots Ennis is the man to beat in the division. No excuses from anyone, especially you guys at the PBC brand who need to just shut up when it comes to this. It doesn't matter how long Stanionis was off. He was never in Boots Ennis' league, period. Boots Ennis did the job, took care of business, is a rightful winner, the 2-belt welterweight champ. He can do whatever he wants because he's the man to beat. I'll be first to admit I wasn't the biggest Boots Ennis fan for the longest time because I thought there were some questions about him. But what he did to Stanionis was absolutely magical and still work to do. I mean, the defense is still not that great because he got hit at times unnecessarily. But he showed the talent he had, and boy, did he put on a heck of a performance by making Stanionis quit on the stool. More for Boots Ennis down the line. And some historical moments of the sport. It was back 44 years ago today at Bally's Park Place in Atlantic City. A high-level lightweight championship fight took place between Hilmer Kenty and Sean O'Grady. We talk about the products of the Kronk Gym, specifically with Thomas Hearns. Another one of the products at that time was Hilmer Kenty. Won a world championship by shocking the standout Ernesto España. Made a couple of defenses before this fight took place against the rugged and tough and good-looking Sean O'Grady, who captured the media with the good looks. Story of this fight was Sean O'Grady just won this one going away, floored Kenty in the 2nd and 8th rounds, en route to a unanimous decision win over 15 rounds. Free TV, ABC, Wide World of Sports, spanning the globe, thrill of victory, agony of defeat. Of course, we know the agony of defeat as a skier somehow flipping sideways in the air going down a hill. That was what Kenty versus O'Grady was on, not the pay-per-view stuff you guys like to brag about. But it was Sean O'Grady hitting the peak of his career when he beat Hilmer Kenty to win the world championship. Of course, it was short-lived because he was stripped of the title for failing to defend against a mandatory who had no business being a mandatory. We know how boxing politics work. Fought a few fights after that until he retired with a record of 81-5. But managed to have an excellent career in the broadcasting and commentary field as an analyst for the standout USA Tuesday night fights when it was on air for the better half of 17 years. Moved on to Fox Sports with Barry Tompkins and Rich Murata providing analysis there. Premier analyst because as a former fighter, he knew the details of a former fighter as a fighter's mind, and that's how he called fights. I mean, terrific fighter, but a standout as an analyst for almost 2 decades, and what was one of the best ones in my opinion. Great analysis. Actually had some kind of a doctorate degree, I believe. I forgot what the field was. But he used all that to analyze the sport and analyze it well, especially when we consider he had a career of 86 fights. When he analyzed fights, it's not like he analyzed it just for the sake of analyzing it. He knew the fighter's mind. He knew the general concept of a fighter, and his analysis was absolutely terrific. Carved up an excellent career as an analyst. It was 44 years ago at the Bally's Park Place in Atlantic City. His landmark moment as a fighter when he stunned the previously unbeaten Hilmer Kenty. Kenty never quite got to that level again. Had a few wins, but basically just went away for a while. Beat Freddie Pendleton at one point in his career, but managed to do work with the Kronk Gym because he was one of the first products of the late Emmanuel Stewart. At the time, the world was introduced to Thomas Hearns. Actually, the first two, I believe, were Hearns and Kenty, if I am correct. That's to tell you about the stature of the Kronk Gym. I mean, the list on there goes on and on and on. But for Hilmer Kenty to be one of the first speaks to the talent that he had. And we close on another historical night. This was 43 years ago today. This was in Tucson, Arizona. Closed circuit television, replayed by Howard Cosell on ABC's Wide World of Sports. It was the iconic Salvador Sanchez getting a tougher than expected unanimous decision win over Ruben Castillo. Ruben Castillo never got to that high level, didn't manage to fight for the world title a few times. Maybe his greatest distinction was having been in the ring with 3 of the 5 greatest Latino fighters of all time in Alexis Arguello, Salvador Sanchez, and Julio Cesar Chavez. He took on Sanchez at a time when Sanchez's stature was starting to rise and was starting to become the premier fighter south of the middleweight division and before the 4 kings of Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, and Duran began to take off. And he was just a beauty to watch. The perfect do-it-all fighter. Box, mix it up. Counterpunching, which was really his strong suit. Defense, great chin. Salvador Sanchez had it all. In this fight, it was a tougher than expected fight because Castillo was no pushover. But Sanchez managed to win the equivalent of a 10 rounds to 5 unanimous decision win, rightfully so, to keep his featherweight championship. But it was how great Salvador Sanchez was. I always bring up Salvador Sanchez because when we talk about guys whose careers cut short because of unfortunate circumstances, Salvador Sanchez is there. You know the story about the tragedy, got whacked upside the railroad, and basically that was it. You know, God rest his soul, and hopefully those around him, his loved ones, found some sort of peace 4.5 decades later. And Salvador Sanchez, had it not been for that, he was staring at multi-million-dollar paydays against guys like Alexis Arguello, Eusebio Pedroza, the standout Hector Camacho, and was likely going to be headed with an all-Mexican showdown with Julio Cesar Chavez because, you know, there was going to be a huge buildup in Mexico for that fight to happen. But this was a case for Salvador Sanchez where a fighter's resume was getting better as he was getting better, and he was just beginning to scratch the surface. I mean, he beat Castillo, he beat Laporte, he demolished Wilfredo Gomez, basically dusted him off like it was nothing. And Gomez was a standout Puerto Rican fighter and beat the Super League great Azuma Nelson by a knockout in the 15th round. And of course, he had the fights with Danny Little Red Lopez, who was a blood and guts warrior during that time. Salvador Sanchez evolutionized to the premier fighters in the pound for pound rankings, and he was probably going to head to number 1 if it wasn't for the tragedy. I should add another one on that list was Juan Laporte. He was going to have a rematch with Laporte before that happened. And then he was going to go to 130 for bigger money fights. I mean, you're talking about a guy who probably could have been tougher to beat as his career was going on because he was just starting to scratch the surface, and his resume was second to none in those featherweight and super featherweight divisions. There's a bunch of who's who. And we talk about his place among the all-time great Latino fighters and Mexican fighters. A lot of people say he's number one. I won't have a problem with that because I think he would have had the distinction of the greatest Mexican fighter of all time locked up had it not been for the tragedy. Because I don't know how guys like Pedroza, Camacho, Arguello, or Chavez could have handled this guy. I mean, this guy, when they say men amongst boys, that was Salvador Sanchez. I mean, he probably could have been easily a top 10 all-time great. And we're talking in that Ali, Ray Robinson, Joe Louis, Henry Armstrong, Willie Pep category. He was trending in that direction before the tragedy happened. And you're talking about among the Latino fighters, I always rate him number 2 behind Roberto Duran. Duran still has the distinction of the greatest Latino fighter ever because I said with Duran, when he made his American splash, the world knew it. And basically, the great Latino fighters from the various Latin American countries followed suit. I put Sanchez behind him, maybe a pinch over Arguello, although I think Arguello and Sanchez could flip-flop, up for debate. You could throw a Chavez in there, obviously. But Salvador Sanchez is definitely in that conversation. And people can say about what could have been. He was traded to a case of a fighter who was going to be basically fulfilled and then some because he had everything in front of him. It was just unfortunate what happened to him in 82 happened. And one of the real little big giants ever. I mean, ask Azuma Nelson about Salvador Sanchez. He gave the perfect synopsis about him on a YouTube feed many years back, described him to mere perfection. Would have basically sealed the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Some people still have him in that category. I don't have a problem with it. But he probably would have had it locked up far and away had the tragedy not happened. Because he was headed in that direction. You're talking about, just in terms of pure talent, maybe a top 15 all-time great fighter. Because he was a perfect do-it-all fighter. And he showed it here against the tough, durable Ruben Castillo 43 years ago today in Tucson, Arizona, when he won a tougher than expected 15-round unanimous decision. But Sanchez was just ridiculously talented, and I mean it in a good way. And the boxing world, and basically the entire country of Mexico, lost a great one. I mean, hopefully the family found solace along the way. Sometimes fighters like this, we talk about what could have been, because some fighters do it to themselves to earn that distinction. Salvador Sanchez was just in an unfortunate situation where just the whole thing just crashed on him and the tragedy happened. May God rest his soul. I mean, he was a great one. I mean, his resume was already through the roof when he beat Azuma Nelson. And as anybody knows just how great Azuma Nelson was and became 3-time world champion in 2 weight classes, Sanchez just basically just put him down and out, and that was it. And the way he dusted off Wilfredo Gomez 2 fights before, and Gomez was a standout featherweight, Sanchez just beat him effortlessly and gave him the beating of his life. That should tell you just how great Salvador Sanchez was, even before the tragedy. But had that not happened, he would have trended to be the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. And I think it would have been number 1 far and away because he would have had Pedroza, Arguello, Camacho, and Chavez right in his path. And I probably would favor him over all 4 of those guys because he was the perfect do-it-all fighter. He could figure you out on the fly. He can adjust on the fly. That's what's how great the late Salvador Sanchez is. God rest his soul. And that'll wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. I hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 14th of April, 2025. Tomorrow night will be a one-topic show, and we'll cover the most explosive night in combat sports history. I will go into it and discuss some of the great rounds that took place in the history of combat sports. And for my fight followers, I think you may know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to give it away. Just be back tomorrow night at 8 p.m. We're going to have a lot of fun. And as always, make self-care your number 1 priority. Take care of yourselves first before you take care of anything else. If you don't take care of yourself first, nothing else matters. You take care of yourself first, good things in life come your way. Have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless and enjoy the evening.